So today we have Tristan Barston, who is going to share with you his experience in this topic. Tristan is a senior consultant and oil spill response specialist in OSRL that has been involved in the response of multiple spill incidents. He is very experienced in working on emergency response processes and contingency planning, development in remote and challenging environments. Before we begin, I want to ask you everybody to mute your microphones, turn off your video, and please notice that this session is going to be recorded and is going to be placed in the OSRL website. If you have any questions, please write them down in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A session after the presentation, and I'll transfer the mic to Tristan.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This afternoon's webinar is part of a series that All Spill Response is running, based around the topic of Are You Response Ready? As Adriana said, we're going to be looking this afternoon at some of the best practices that you can use when you're organising, storing and maintaining your Tier 1 All Spill Response resources. So what's the objective of the webinar today? So we're going to look at some of the ways that we've seen as an organisation, companies organise, store and maintain their facilities' Tier 1 response resources. And we're looking at how they train the staff that are going to use them, should I say, to be as effective as possible in the event of an oil spill. So we're going to look at 5 areas. We're going to look at where we should locate our response resources, depending on the operation and the risks that we face. We're going to look at the different types of storage facilities available to us. We're going to look at how we should organise our response resources. We're going to look at ways that we can make sure that we have an effective maintenance program, so when we come to use our equipment, it's ready for us to use. And then last but not least, we're going to look at how we sustain our response readiness. So how we keep all our people up to date in the use of the response resources. So the first step, locating your response resources. So this is where we're going to put them. Now obviously, if it's a fixed facility that we're working on, we have a good understanding of what our oil spill risk is likely to be and where it's going to come from. As you can see on the screen here, there's a small map or aerial view, and the red area that's marked on there, this is a fixed facility at a refinery. We knew our risks. So some of the things that we had to think about when we placed this Tier 1 stockpile was, were we going to put it in a building that was already there, or could we build something from scratch, or could we identify an area that we could utilise? And the decision that we made in this particular instance was we found an area that we can utilise. So they made a 30 metre by 30 metre hard standing area. We put 3 shipping containers, so the 40 foot by 10 foot shipping containers, which were racked out, and then a covered area for the response trailers. We also made sure that if there was an incident, the incident wouldn't impact our ability to get to our location. And in this particular scenario, we had 2 ways to get into this area. We could go around the perimeter of the facility, so out of the way of any likely impact area, or we could also come in via the river, via the water. And that's why we had a slipway built for us that was usable at all states of the tide. So site accessibility is one. We've got to make sure that if there is an incident, our responders can get to that location as quickly and easily as possible. Now, the size of the storage area depends on the equipment that we're storing. If it's a small facility, or if we only have a small amount of equipment and a small amount of personnel, then obviously the size of the area that we need doesn't have to be that large. We also want it to be secure. Emergency response equipment has a number of very, very useful items in there that can be attractive to people. Things like anchors, batteries, radios. We want to make sure they're held in a secure location and that they are available to us in the event of an oil spill. We also want to make sure that there's a water supply, preferably a freshwater supply for washdown of equipment when it's come back from the response, and also sanitation facilities and washing points for our response staff. Some of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about our response resources storage area. We need it to be organised so that response equipment can be found as easily as possible, because as we know, once an incident's happened, everybody is ramped up, everybody's looking and wanting to do something. We haven't got time to start digging through piles of equipment, searching for the right hydraulic hose or right coupling. We want all the equipment together, as we can see in that top picture on the right hand side. We've got the pumps on the bottom, and then directly above them we've got the right hoses. So if we take a pump, the right hoses are there available for us. Same with the middle photograph there. We have the power unit, the correct hoses and the correct skimmer, all available to us in a single package. We've also got to make sure that our responders, when they come to the area, are safe. So they have access to fire extinguishers, first aid kit, the right PPE is available as they are going into our response resources storage area and can keep themselves safe. We've got to make sure that everything is signed so we know where different things are kept. We have a traffic route. If we have one or two entrances and exits, we prefer people to come in from one route and out through the other. Again, this is really important to keep people safe. We need a sign that displays our safety rules, a map of the area showing muster points, emergency escape routes, basically everything that we do in our normal operation, we want to mirror in our response resources staging area. And ideally, it's nice to have a sheltered maintenance area and a washdown area with closed drains. So when we recover our response resources from our response, we have an area where we can refurbish it and bring it back up to standard and put it back into storage, ready to be used if it's needed again in the future. The second step we're going to look at is the different types of storage facilities. So this is what we're going to store our equipment in. Again, it really depends on the type and size of the resources that we are using. It also depends, are we going to have a new build? So are we going to put up a building or an area or a shipping container that is brand new, just dedicated to our response equipment? Or are we going to repurpose an area already available to us, part of a building that's already available to us, or some other different application? One of the good things about having to repurpose an area is it really allows you to think outside of the box when it comes to the best way to store your resources, especially when it comes to how you're going to transport those resources from their storage location to the site. To give you an example, I was working on a project in West Africa a couple of years ago, and their main response equipment was very light, very handheld. So a very small skimmer, little power pack, some fast tanks. Everybody knows the collapsible storage tanks, and then also sorbents. So it's quite a small amount of equipment. Now, ubiquitous to this particular area were the Toyota Land Cruiser pickup trucks. So we made sure that we packaged our equipment in such a way that it would fit directly in the back of the pickup truck. So in all, it was 3 lifts. There was a large storage pack, and then the skimmer and power pack went in last. This would enable them to load the equipment quickly and take it to the site. And again, if we think about where we're going to locate our equipment, we're looking at very, very similar things when we're looking at the places we're storing our equipment in. We want them secure against unauthorized access. So we want entry to be as easy as possible when required, but if you're not supposed to be in there, then it's difficult to get in. And this isn't just focused on people. The number of times Elmer and other responders have been to a site to do maintenance or do a project or a task or a drill on equipment, and we've opened up the shipping container only to be faced with what looks like a BBC program called The Magic of the Animal Kingdom, where there's rats, where there's all kinds of creepy crawlers that have managed to gain entry into this dry, safe location and made nests or eaten, in worst cases, people's response equipment. We need our response resources to be stored in somewhere that's clean, that's dry, that's well ventilated, if possible, temperature controlled in extreme environments. And this is really critical when we're talking about things like dispersants. We really want to make sure that our dispersant isn't exposed to the sunlight. In fact, our response resources as a whole don't do well if they're left in a corner of a yard exposed to UV rays for years on end. When you go to pick them up, they crumble like dust between your fingers. So we want to make sure that the area that they're stored in, when we go to them, they're not covered in a thick layer of dust or grime or oil, and that they're ready to use. And last but not least, we want to make sure that they're separated from flammable, explosive or dangerous goods. Again, this comes down to the safety of our responders. We want to make sure that they're not having to deal with anything that they're not aware of. And secondly, don't forget, we are leaving this equipment, sometimes with batteries in there, which obviously have chemicals, small amounts of fuel in fuel tanks. So we want to make sure that the fire risk of our storage container, storage area, is minimized as much as possible. So we've spoken about where we're going to locate our resources. So we want them close enough to our area of impact from an oil spill that they can quickly be deployed. What we're going to store our resources in. So we want something that keeps them protected and safe until we need to use them. Now we're going to look at how we organize our resources. So we're going to think about what is it that we need to get at first. So we need to have them organized so we can get to the resources that we need as as quickly as possible, and as it says there, without the need to move other pieces of equipment out of the way before they can be accessed. I'm sure 75% of us on this call who have been involved in a practical oil spill response operation have arrived at the site. We've decided, okay, this is the scenario we're going to do today. We're going to need this boom and this skimmer and these power packs and this temporary containment band. And we start getting the equipment out, and there might be a hose missing. Or we might be looking for an inflator for the boom. And then somebody's sent off and they're digging around the back of a container looking for this type of equipment. To be honest, drills and exercises are the times we want people to do that. We want to identify that this is a problem in peacetime as we're testing. I've been on actual responses in the past as a technical advisor where we've gone and reviewed and assessed an area, a possible impact area. We've sent a message back to the resource location saying we're going to put out some protection booming and other strategies, and they've sent us some equipment. But when it's arrived at our location, we're missing a vital piece. Now, unfortunately, it took 6 hours for the vehicle with the equipment in to get from the storage location to our location, which means it'd take another 6 hours after they found the bit of equipment that we need for us to actually start our protection booming. And by then, it actually moved from a protection to a collection operation because the oil had worked its way down the river and was now at our site. So it's really important that we organise our resources so the pieces of equipment that need each other to run are all located together. Things that we use more frequently, the lighter, more frequently used equipment, things like sorbent material, responder PPE, the warning size, the hand tools. I will also add to that our assessment tools. All of our responders at Oil Spill Response have go bags that they take with them if we're mobilised as technical advisors. And in those go bags are very simple assessment tools. So if they're sent out to a location, they can do a operational assessment, either of the oiling that's occurred or a pre-oiling assessment, record it efficiently and report back to the incident management or emergency response team who are managing the operation. Again, I would have something like this close to hand at the front of your storage location. As we go into our shipping container, into our storage area, other things that we need less frequently are things like the booming systems, our pumps, skimmers, power packs. So if you think about it, the type of equipment that's further to the back of our storage area takes more response resources to utilise, mobilise and deploy. So 1 or 2 people can put absorbent material down. It only takes 1 responder to use PPE effectively. It only takes 1 responder to put out marking tape, cordoning off an area and to make an initial assessment. So the first person to our site can utilise the equipment immediately to hand. As more people arrive, as we get more information about the response operation that we're facing, that's when we can pick the equipment that we need to effectively deal with that incident. So in general, our resource area should be organised, as it says there, to allow clean and clear access to warehouses, storage areas and stored materials. Time is of the essence in a tier 1 response. The incident's just happened. We're going to do our assessment, and then we're going to actively do something to contain and control the spill. So we need to make it as safe as possible for our responders to get to our location, get to the equipment, load it, and take it to the site that it's needed. So to that end, we have to keep aisles, passageway and exits clear and free of slip, trip and strike against hazards. So don't bury your equipment at the back. Make sure, as the 3 pictures show, or especially the bottom picture shows on the right hand side there, everything's in its place. It's got the clear plastic containers so you can see what's in each container, so we can get the right equipment quickly and easily. Again, we've got to store our flammable, combustible and hazardous materials in a way that minimises the dangers. So the fuel that we need for our pumps, the oils that we need for our hydraulic systems, they're not all just thrown together. They're stored in a suitable location, in a suitable container. Again, store materials and supplies in an organised manner to ensure easy access for retrieval and transportation. So if we know that we're going to need a small skimming system, and that small skimming system comes with a pump, a hydraulic unit, hydraulic hoses, and some discharge hoses, we want to make sure that they're all stored together. So if we need this system, we've got everything we need. The same with booming systems. We have our boom. Close to it, we want our anchoring systems if we're going to use it in an anchoring layout. We want our marker buoys. We want our marker lights. Everything involved in that particular system should be easily visible and easily accessed. Place heavier loads on lower or middle shelves. Again, this is common sense. Back to manual handling and also safety. We don't want to put our responders, when they're trying to get the equipment out of the area, to put themselves at any risk. And tying into the manual handling, if we're going to use powered equipment such as forklifts, hydraulic jacks, instead of manually lifting materials, it's really important that they have clear access to that area so they can get in there, get the equipment and load it in as quickly a time as possible. So now we're going to look at the maintenance programs. So we have all this equipment. We've found an ideal place for it. We've stored it in a secure, dry location. We've organised it so the right equipment is immediately available to us. Now, how are we going to make sure that when we need it, it's ready for us to use? Now, as it says in the title, the maintenance of our oil spill equipment is essential to ensure that it remains in a state of readiness. Because if you think about it, our oil spill response equipment spends most of its life sitting on a shelf. One of the things that we need to think about is very similar to your car that you have stuck in the driveway as we're all on lockdown due to the COVID-19. When equipment isn't used, things like tyre pressures go down, the engine starts to run a little bit roughly as it's just sat there. So we need to set up a system so that we can look at the equipment, we can run the equipment, and then also we can train ourselves and others on the effective use of that equipment. And that's where our maintenance program comes in. Now, depending on the equipment you have, the resources you have, there will be specific maintenance programs provided by your equipment manufacturer and these must be followed. But in a general guideline, we have at the bottom of the slide, weekly, we're going to do a security check. Make sure that nobody's got in there and stolen the batteries out of our radios, drained off a bit of dispersant because they need something to clean up an oil patch, or even taken some of our sorbent pads to clean up a minor spill that they've had without telling us. So we're going to do a brief visual inspection weekly, just looking for major problems. So anything damaged, and that goes for the container that the equipment's in as well. Is anything leaking, or is anything missing? Depending on the size of your stockpile, this could be done in 15 minutes. It could be a couple of hours, depending on how large your equipment stockpile is. So that's our weekly walkthrough. On a monthly basis, again, we're going to individually look at the pieces of equipment and check for condition and serviceability. So we're not actually dragging them out of the container every month, but we're having a good look around them. So where your boom is flaked in the corner, we're looking round. Can we see anything in there? Is there a nest been built by a family of rats? Or has it been tied on or put into the storage container in such a way that now a corner of the boom is rubbing against an exposed metal edge? So we want to check and make sure that each individual piece of equipment is satisfactory. We're going to look at our consumables as well. So the batteries, the first aid kit, the PPE. Again, the number of times that myself and my colleagues within All Spill Response have been to a facility and you've read the list of what should be in this container, and when you open it up, there's things like gloves missing, hard hats missing, Tyvek suits or boots that are missing. Because what happens, people go into work and they've forgotten it, or it gets damaged and they don't have time, or they don't feel that they have time to go and get a new one. But they think, it's okay, there's one over in the oil spill container. And they go and use it, thinking they'll put it back afterwards, and then they forget. But now we've got all this information, what do we do with it? It's really important that there is one person in charge of your maintenance program for your oil spill response resources. They don't have to be the person that goes out and does these weekly and monthly checks. But if they're not, any problems that we do find have to be reported to that person, who will then arrange for any repairs, or anything else that needed, replacement of equipment, to be carried out. So quarterly, now we're looking at quarterly. This is every 3 months. This is when we get our equipment list about what resources that we have available to us. And we run through it piece by piece, again, making sure that everything that we think is in the container, in our storage stockpile, is actually there. We're going to run all our internal combustion engines, so our pumps, outboard motors, if we have outboard motors for our vessels. This is also a really good time. Once every 3 months is a really good time to practice the use and mobilisation and deployment of one piece of equipment. So, if you have a small skimming system, perhaps a drum skimmer, then we bring it out of our storage area onto a nice clear hard standing, and we look at where the power pack will go, how the hydraulic hoses fit, how the suction and discharge hoses fit on the skimmer, where we would need to put our temporary storage tank. Again, it gets people used to using this piece of equipment. And finally, always important, keep a record of the work completed and report any issues that we found. And last but not least, annually. This is where we do our major maintenance. So we change the fuel. We don't want to leave fuel sitting in our pumps, our skimmers, things like that. We change the oil, air filters. Again, always referring back to our manufacturer's instructions. And annually is also when we do one of our major drills. It's where we get our entire team involved. It's booked in the calendar. We've chosen a scenario of a possible oil spill that could happen at our facility. And we're going to practice how we would respond to that scenario. So there's many of our emergency response team available as possible. And we either take the equipment to a site, a pre-identified site, and deploy it, or again, we can use our lay down area and just practice laying out the equipment as it would be used. Now I can see one of the questions that has come in on the chat, which I think I will cover now, and it's from Alfred, and it says, Tristan, can you kindly throw some light on how to store oil spill equipment on open sea installations such as rigs and tugboats? Excellent question, Alfred, especially because I know the answer. So again, we are looking for the same type of storage as you would on land. So shipping containers work excellently for offshore storage equipment. The equipment that you can hire, so the tier 1 equipment that you can hire from oil spill response comes in 10-foot or 20-foot by 10-foot shipping containers. And they're all racked out. They can be locked. Obviously, they're weatherproof. They've got lifting equipment that comes with them. And they're self-contained. So everything that you need, again, is in that container. But let's have a think about where we want to position that container on our vessel, on our rig. What are we looking for? What do we want to avoid, in fact? So we want to avoid an incident happening and us not being able to get to that container. Or we need to do lifting operations to move things out the way or move the shipping container around so we can access the doors. And this is easier said than done. This is something that you have to do in partnership with the OIM of the rig or the vessel master, because they're not too keen on you taking up some prime deck space with your shipping container that they may not feel being needed. So it's all about communication. You look at the best location to store your shipping container of oil spill response equipment, or it could be that your equipment isn't in a shipping container. It could be that it's those yellow plastic bins, the wheelie bins that we see with the absorbents in and the gloves and the waste. Now, has everybody been on a rig and seen these type of containers? I'll ask another question. Has everybody been on a rig or a vessel seen these type of containers that have been smashed, that have had chunks taken out of them, that look like they've been a demolition derby? Of course. Now, why is that? Well, people put them in locations where they're easy visible, where they've got easy access, but also they haven't thought about how they're going to be protected. So again, when we're positioning our equipment, one of the things that we have to think about is its safety. To make sure that where we've got the equipment, it's going to be secure, it's going to be out of the way enough that it's not getting in people's way, but it's going to be accessible enough that we can get to it quickly should the need arise.
And Tristan, can I add to this a little bit?
Please, Elmer.
Yeah, my experience on the rigs, also on some of these offshore supply vessels that have some response equipment, sometimes they put the container there and they don't realize the access to it, and then when they're going to try to drill or deploy something, they cannot open the doors, or because they just told the crane put the container there, and then they never thought the whole process about when you access the equipment. And another thing that I have experienced is that and by the way, and then you don't have a crane at the boat at the moment, and then you're in trouble. But the other issue is a lot of fresh water. A lot of people just do the exercise and they put things away. They don't clean it. And then things start getting very, very bad and rusty and mold and conditions are very bad. So you really want to have a good maintenance program for offshore. And now my third issue is the batteries. I had a lot of issues with battery because they don't have a good battery program to keep them charged. And then we have to wait until it gets charged or try to borrow somebody's battery. So there's offshore, you have to be a little bit very creative and more serious about the equipment because it's exposed a lot and then you are isolated. You don't have a lot of help. Sometimes you make a mistake in line and you can send somebody in a truck and get it very quick. But when you're out there, it's a lot of trouble. I was answering the question and then you picked it up, but it's good. I'm glad that you picked it up. Thank you, sir.
Elmer, this is a team effort. I always appreciate your experience. You know I do, sir. And one of the good things that I've seen when we're talking about space that we need around the shipping container is something that was developed by our equipment hire team a couple of years ago now for certain types of equipment that we hire out. The one that I'm thinking of in my head is the dispersant. So you can hire a dispersant spray package from Oil Spill Response. Comes with pumps, comes with dispersant, comes with Fido nozzles. It's universal. It's a brilliant bit of kit. And one of the things that we always got asked was, once we open the container, how much space do we need around it to utilise, to run it? So the drawing that we did, detailed. Obviously, we don't need to bring the dispersant out. The dispersant stays in the container. But the pump comes out, the hoses come out, where we run the hoses. So there's little diagrams that we do for clients that details. You need 10 foot of space, or 3.3 meters if you're a European, in front of your shipping container. To either side, you need 6 feet, 2 meters of space. So little things like that can really help people that aren't used to the amount of space that an oil spill response operation takes up. Oh, one thing I will mention, about your maintenance program. People always ask us, at Oil Spill Response, what system do you use to help maintain your equipment? Well, we actually use a system called Maximo. I believe it's from IBM, because we have hundreds and thousands of pieces of equipment in various bases all around the world. So we need a very clever, a very linked system to make sure and track all of our equipment. But I've also seen it done just as effectively on smaller stockpiles on whiteboards, where on the left-hand side your piece of equipment is written, and then it has a year or a month or a quarter, depending on the size of the whiteboard, where you put a tick or you write in what's wrong with it, and it's the maintenance and use has been tracked that way. So you find out whatever works for you. And last but not least, we're going to look at sustaining response readiness. So we found a great place for our stockpile. We've got it in a container that's going to keep it safe, secure, out of the weather. We're making sure that it's been checked, run, tested and maintained effectively. Now, what about the actual people that are going to use it? How do we make sure that the people that are going to use it are confident in its use? Well, this is where sustaining our response readiness comes in. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but regular drills and exercises and competency training are all essential tools when it comes to maintaining response readiness with pieces of equipment. You need hands-on time with this equipment to really understand its use. So an equipment deployment exercise, as it says, allows people to familiarize themselves with the type of resources that you have available to you on site, but it also allows them to look at what your potential oil spill scenario could be. What could they be responding to? If you think about firemen, when firemen train, they don't just train on one type of fire. They could be using the same equipment, but their response actions to a paper fire would be different to a liquids fire, could be different to a gas fire. Your responders with your oil spill response equipment really will be working in different environments. So with your drills, with your exercises, if you can get them used to using the equipment that you have in different environments, even when it's raining. And look, there's not an emergency responder amongst us that likes exercising or running a drill in the rain. But it's really interesting to see sometimes what effect it has on the resources that we're using and the environment that we're working in. So try and get creative when you're planning your drills and your exercises. Because it really allows, as that last point says, really allows our responders to practice how they're going to respond to the event at their location. And that's what we're aiming for here. We want our response personnel to be confident in the use of the equipment to make sure that we deal with the incident that we face in a safe and effective manner. But then there's also other things that we have to think about when it comes into our drills and exercises. Because not only are we allowing our response personnel to walk through a response in slow time, try different things. So what if we did this? What if we did that? And practice communication. As we can see by the photograph on the top left-hand corner, that's again Elmer, one of our leading trainers and duty managers based in Fort Lauderdale, describing to our response team exactly how he wants the boom placed, and you find out what method works for you. In this particular case, it was drawing diagrams in the sand with a stick. You find out what works for you. And you also find out what other things do we need to think about when we're responding to that incident. An example that I've got there on the slide is this particular facility that we were running a drill in. We were simulating that there had been a release of gasoline from a truck loading rack. The plan, because we always make people get their oil spill response plan and read through it to make sure that it's effective, actually called for a shut-off valve nearby to be closed. And there, as it says, keeping the spill on site rather than draining into a nearby ditch. But when we went over to the shut-off valve, it was locked. And do you think we could find the key? You know we couldn't find the key. So that's why it's really important when we're planning our drills and exercises, use a scenario, use our plan, make sure that what we're doing is going to be as effective as possible. Now, there are a number of ways that OSRL are here to support you. We've talked about quite a few things this morning, and I know I've bombarded you with information. But we are your technical support when it comes to your Tier 1 response resources. We have some self-assessment tools available to you. You can download them straight from our website. We have a Ready Check assessment, and actually, if you go back and look into our recordings of the webinar, one of the earlier webinars that we did was on how to use this Ready Check assessment. We've also got capability review guides. So how can you manage or make sure or ensure that the response equipment you have on site will actually deal with the potential oil spill that you are facing? How do you marry those two up? And that's our capability review guides. We've spoken at length, especially on the last two slides, about the importance of drills and exercises. We are here to support you in planning for your drills. I know we're going through a period of restricted travel at the moment, but we can give very good guidance over the telephone, via email, in a remote working environment to help you plan and help you get the most out of your drills and exercises. It might be that following on or even pre a drill or exercise, you identify that some of your team needs some additional training. Again, we can help you. We have a number of online and remote delivery courses, either published courses, so these are standard IMO, ICS courses that you can do, or we can do client tailored, so specific training tailored to your needs. Capability reviews. We're working on a number of capability reviews for our clients at the moment. This is where we review the equipment, the logistics, and the management of that equipment. So it could be where you are now, you're like, Tristan, it's all been very interesting, but you don't have to worry about us. We have Tristan Barston's Tier 2 oil spill response organisation just down the road. And he's told us that he can deal with anything that we might have. How do you make sure that Tristan isn't feeding you a line? One of the ways is the capability review. Again, we can do this remotely, or when the travel restrictions ease, actually physically at your location. And last but not least, contingency plans. So we spoke about this as well in our drills. How do we make sure that our contingency plans gives our responders and our management team the information that it needs to do or carry out an effective response? We can review your plans for you. If you're offshore, shoreline, or actually now inland operation, we can do or put you in touch with people who can supply you all spill modelling to give you an idea of where your product will go if it gets spilled. We can look at your risk assessment, make sure that you're capturing every possible risk for a major oil spill. Environmental sensitivities, so what's around you, and also I'll tie into that socio-economic sensitivities. Very few organisations work in isolation. There are other organisations, other operations around you. If you have an incident, how will that affect these other operations? And last but not least, our wildlife planning. We have a dedicated wildlife planning and response team at Oil Spill Response here that will be able to guide you through the wildlife planning process. One thing, if you forget everything that I told you for the last 48 minutes, please remember that bottom line where it says you can get technical advice over the phone outside of a response. Now, you can go to our website, www.oilspillresponse.com. You can email myself or Elmer directly, or you can email the groups that Elmer and myself run, Houston or the duty managers. And Mandy has also put our website link up in the meeting chat if anybody wants to copy it. We're also active on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. But if you go on our website, on the oilspillresponse.com, you'll see, or you'll be able to find a little blurb about Elmer and myself, and beneath the little blurb, it will give you our contact details. So that's the end of my presentation for today. I'm going to open the chat up now to any questions that you may have. I'll give that a couple of minutes for anything to pop up. But one of the things, while people are thinking about questions, one of the things that cropped up on the previous webinar was about the storage or the safe storage of dispersants. Now, obviously, with our global dispersant stockpile, where Oil Spill Response has 5,000 cubic meters of dispersant stored at various important locations around the world, ready for immediate deployment and use. This is something that's really keen on our minds. One of the questions that came up was, does dispersant have a shelf life? Now, Certain types of dispersant do have shelf lives. Again, you have to revert back to your manufacturer's instructions. But more important than shelf life is dispersant efficiency. The things that affect dispersant efficiency, obviously, if it's been exposed to sunlight, if it's been taken out of its original container and put into a new container. A perfect example of this is on some of the response vessels that we've seen, where it's been decanted into a tank, into the vessel, and then it's sat there for 3-5 years. And then we get asked, is it still going to work? There's a number of ways that you can check. Actually, there's 2 ways that you can check. The first is you take a sample and you send it off to the laboratory, and the laboratory do tests on it to check dispersant effectiveness. That's the ideal way. An immediate way that you can do is an operational or jam jar test. Again, you can find details of this test on our website in some of our documentation. This is where you take a jam jar, some seawater or the water body that is at risk of being polluted by the oil, your oil type, and a drop or 2 of your dispersant. You shake those up, and then you look at the results. Again, what you're aiming for, as we always are with dispersants, is a nice uniform coffee colour that shows the oil droplets breaking up, or the oil breaking up into droplets and dispersing through the oil. Anything else is not what we're looking for. So, with dispersant, some dispersant has a shelf life. Also, other drivers with dispersant, it could be a regulatory requirement, as it is in the UK, that you test your dispersant for effectiveness. Excuse me. That you test your dispersant for effectiveness at set periods of time. I thought that was a useful discussion. Does anybody have any other questions? No? Okay, well, like I said, if you do think of questions afterwards, please get in contact with us. Please let us know, either by email or through the website, and we're happy to help and guide you. Thank you for your time.